Right at the backyard barbecue party, I was forced to serve my son and daughter-in-law's friends inside the very $600,000 house that I bought. My son pointed his finger straight at my face and said, "Either become a servant to my wife or get out of this house." Then he threw a server's apron at me. But I am still the one holding the property deed. So by 9 p.m. I showed up with my attorney, exposed the whole truth, and forced them to pack up and leave. Thank you so much for joining me here on Dad Returns. To help build our community, please drop a comment showing your city or country. Where you tuned in from, note that this narrative includes fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental, but the lesson behind it matters. My son pointed a finger straight at my face and told me to get out of my own house. That sentence has lived in my chest for months now. Not like a bruise, bruises fade. More like a nail driven into old wood. You can pull it out, but the hole stays. I want to tell you how we got to that backyard, to that grill, to that moment. Because it didn't start with cruelty. It never does. It started the way most things start, with love, with loss, and with a man who believed that the people he raised would remember where they came from. My name is Walter Gaines. I am 60 years old. For 38 of those years, I was a carpenter. Not the weekend project kind. Not the man who builds a deck and calls himself a craftsman. I mean the kind of carpenter who shows up before sunrise, who can read the grain of a board the way some men read a newspaper, who knows by the weight of a plank whether it will hold or whether it will split under pressure. I built Bennett & Sons woodshop from a single table saw in a rented garage into a 12-man operation off Route 48 outside Dayton, Ohio. We made custom cabinetry staircases, built-in bookshelves, the kind of furniture that gets passed down instead of thrown out. I was proud of that. Carol was proud of that. Carol was my wife for 31 years. She had red hair that went silver at the temples when she turned 50, and she refused to dye it because she said she'd earned every strand. She kept a garden in the backyard of our rental on Birch Street, tomatoes, zinnias, a rose bush that climbed the fence every summer like it was trying to escape. She used to say that a house isn't a home until something is growing in it. I used to say that was the most Carol thing she had ever said, and she would throw a dish towel at me and laugh. She was diagnosed in March of 2020. Pancreatic cancer stage 3. The doctor who told us had kind eyes and a careful voice, and I remember thinking that it must be the hardest part of his job, sitting across from two people whose whole world just changed shape and trying to hand them that information gently, like it was something that could be held without breaking. We fought it the way Carol fought everything, straight on, no flinching. Chemotherapy, a clinical trial in Columbus. A second opinion at the Cleveland Clinic. I drove every mile of it. I sat in every waiting room. I learned what words like CA 19-9 and gemcitabine meant because Carol deserved a husband who understood what was happening inside her body, not just someone who showed up and held her hand without knowing why. She passed on a Tuesday in November of 2021. It was raining, the thin, gray kind of Ohio rain that doesn't commit to anything. She was in our bed at home the way she wanted. I was holding her hand. Ryan was there. That is all I will say about that day, because some things belong only to the people who were in the room. What came after was the accounting. I had spent 38 years building something. The shop, the reputation, the savings account I added to every month, like it was a second mortgage I owed to our future. Carol and I had talked about the house for years, a real house, not a rental, something with a yard where she could grow more than tomatoes. We never bought one while she was alive because there was always a reason to wait. The shop needed a new kiln. Ryan needed braces, then college help, then a loan when he started his own business. There was always a reason. After she was gone, I sat at the kitchen table on Birch Street, and I looked at the numbers. $410,000 in savings. The shop which I sold to my foreman, Dale Hutchins, for a fair price because Dale had earned it, and I no longer had the heart for it. The truck, a 2009 Ford F250 that I had driven 190,000 miles, and which I sold to a guy named Pete from Miamisburg for $8,000 cash. When I added it all together, I had just over $600,000. I bought the house on Clover Hill Drive on a cold morning in January of 2022. $600,000. Every cent of it mine, built from sawdust and early mornings and 38 years of showing up. I paid cash. No mortgage, no co-signer, no bank officer telling me what I could or couldn't afford. The closing took less than an hour. When the title agent slid the keys across the table, my hand was shaking, not from weakness, but from the particular weight of a thing you have worked your whole life toward and finally touched. The house was a 2-story colonial with a covered front porch, a kitchen big enough to actually cook in, and a backyard with good afternoon light. There was a section along the back fence where the soil was dark and soft, exactly the kind Carol used to kneel in on Birch Street with her gardening gloves and her old radio playing country music she pretended not to love. Ryan drove up that afternoon. He was 34, then broad-shouldered like I used to be with Carol's eyes and my stubbornness, a combination I had always found equal parts endearing and exhausting. He walked through every room with me, his boots loud on the hardwood floors, and when we stood on the back porch looking out at that yard, he put his arm around my shoulders, the way men do when words feel too small. "Dad," he said, and his voice was thick in the way it gets when he's trying not to show something. "She would have loved this place." "I know," I said. He pulled me into a hug, then a real one, not the kind men give each other at arm's length. He held on for a long moment, and when he stepped back his eyes were red at the rims, and he didn't bother to look away. "You don't have to worry about anything now," he said. "You did your part. You took care of all of us your whole life." He squeezed my shoulder hard enough that I felt it in the bone. "Now it's our turn to take care of you. I promise you that, Dad. I promise." I believed him. I want you to understand that. I am not a naive man. I spent nearly 4 decades running a business, managing crews, reading contracts, dealing with suppliers who smiled at you while they padded the invoice. I know what people look like when they are performing sincerity versus when they mean it. My son meant it that day. I would stake 38 years of reading people on that, which is what makes everything that came after so hard to explain. Not because it was complicated, but because the most painful betrayals are never the ones that arrive wearing a mask. They are the ones that start with a real hug on a back porch, in the cold January light, with your son's voice breaking over a promise he fully intended to keep. The road from that porch to everything else that is the story I need to tell you. The road from that porch led exactly 2 years before it turned into something I didn't recognize. For 24 months after I moved into Clover Hill Drive, life was quiet, in the way I had forgotten quiet could be. I planted tomatoes along the back fence in Carol's memory, not because I particularly enjoy gardening, but because I needed something alive in that yard, something that required attention and rewarded it. I learned badly how to cook more than sandwiches. I had coffee with Frank DeLuca next door on Tuesday mornings, a retired electrician from Cleveland, who had strong opinions about the designated hitter rule and weak opinions about everything else, which made him excellent company. I started sleeping through the night again, something I hadn't done since Carol's diagnosis. Ryan called every Sunday. Sometimes Brianna would get on the line briefly. She had a bright, clipped voice, efficient like someone who had a list of things to accomplish, and a phone call was one of them. Their boy Tyler was 6 when I moved in, then 7, growing fast, the way boys do when you're not watching closely enough. I saw them at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at Tyler's 7th birthday party, at one of those indoor trampoline places, where the music is loud enough to rearrange your teeth. Everything was fine. I want to say that clearly because I don't want you to think I saw it coming and looked away. I did not see it coming. My son was not a villain in those 2 years. He was just my son, imperfect, occasionally prideful, but present. Calling on Sundays, showing up at Christmas, keeping his promise, or so I believed. The call came on a Wednesday in January of 2024. Ryan's voice had a texture I hadn't heard since Carol's diagnosis, that particular flatness men get when they are holding something heavy and trying not to let you hear the weight of it. "Dad," he said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." His contracting company, RG Home Solutions, which he had built over 8 years, into a 12-person crew doing kitchen remodels and bathroom renovations across Montgomery County, had gone under. Not slowly, not with warning signs he could point to. A string of bad contracts, a materials supplier who went bankrupt mid-project, 2 clients who sued over delays and won. The kind of collapse that doesn't announce itself until the building is already on the ground. The bank foreclosed on their house in Beaver Creek 3 weeks later. I drove to see him the following Saturday. He met me at the door of the extended stay motel off I-675 where he and Brianna and Tyler were living out of 2 suitcases and a plastic bin of Tyler's Legos. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and microwave meals. Tyler was sitting on the bed in his socks watching cartoons with the volume too low, the way kids do when they sense that the adults in the room need quiet more than they do. Ryan looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in a month. His jaw was tight, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he kept standing up and sitting down like he couldn't decide which one was less humiliating. "I don't need money," he said before I could open my mouth. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed. "I just need time. A few months. Until I can get back on my feet." Brianna sat in the chair by the window with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on something outside the parking lot, the highway anywhere but me. She was 32, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with the kind of posture that suggested she had spent her whole life refusing to let anyone see her bend. She had grown up hard, Ryan had told me once. A single-mother apartments that changed every year. The kind of childhood where security was something other people had. I understood that scar. I respected it even. Some wounds make people careful. Some make them determined. I would spend the next several months learning which kind Brianna carried. "You can come home," I said. Ryan's head came up fast. "Dad, I mean it. The house has 4 bedrooms. Tyler needs a real bed, not a motel mattress." I looked at Brianna then because she was the one I needed to reach. "Both of you, come home." She turned from the window. Her eyes were dry and very steady. "We don't want to impose," she said. "You're not imposing. You're family." The word landed differently on each of them. Ryan's shoulders dropped about an inch, the way a man's do when he's been bracing for something that doesn't hit. Brianna held very still for a moment. Then nodded once, a small, precise movement, like she was filing something away. That night, a cold February rain came down sideways off Lake Erie and made a sound against the motel windows like radio static. I helped Ryan load the plastic bin into my truck. Tyler carried his own backpack very seriously, both straps on the way 8-year-olds do when they want to be useful. When I lifted him into the back seat, he smelled like shampoo and the particular warmth of a child who has been anxious all day and is finally cautiously relaxing. "Grandpa," he said as I buckled his seatbelt. "Yeah, buddy. Is your house big?" "Big enough," I said. He thought about that for a second, then nodded with the grave authority of a child who has decided something is acceptable. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I did neither because the rain was cold and Ryan was watching from the doorway, and some moments you just carry quietly. On the drive back to Clover Hill Drive, I said the only thing I needed to say. I said it calmly, without making it a threat, because it wasn't one, it was simply the truth, and I had spent 38 years believing that the truth stated clearly was enough. "This is still my house," I told Ryan. "You're welcome in it for as long as you need. But it's my house. That's the only rule." Ryan reached across the center console and gripped my forearm the way he used to when he was a teenager, and wanted me to know something mattered to him without saying it out loud. "I know, Dad," he said. "I know." Behind us, Tyler had fallen asleep against the window, his breath fogging a small circle on the glass, his backpack still on his lap, like he wasn't ready to put it down yet. I should have paid more attention to who stayed quiet on that drive. 3 months. That is all it took to turn a guest into a landlord. I want to be precise about that number because precision matters when you are trying to explain how a thing happened. Not 3 years, not 3 decades. 90 days, give or take, from the night I buckled Tyler into my truck in a cold February rain to the morning I carried my own mattress down a flight of stairs and pushed it through the door of the laundry room. The first month was genuinely fine. Ryan fixed the gutter above the garage that had been pulling away from the fascia since October, climbed up there on a Saturday morning, without being asked, came down with paint on his forearm and grease on his knees, and I thought, there he is. There is the son I raised. Brianna cooked dinner twice that first week, a chicken casserole and a pasta dish, and set the table properly, placemats and everything, the way people do when they are guests, and want you to know they understand that. Tyler did his homework at the kitchen table and called me Grandpa Walt and asked me approximately 400 questions a day about woodworking, which I answered every single one of, because those were the best 400 questions anyone had asked me in years. I thought, this is going to be all right. The shift was so gradual I couldn't tell you the exact day it started. That is the thing about slow change, it doesn't announce itself. It accumulates the way sawdust does in a shop. You don't notice it until you look down and realize the floor is covered. It began with the bedroom. 6 weeks in, Brianna came to me on a Sunday afternoon with what she called a practical suggestion. She stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, Carol's bedroom, the room I had chosen because the morning light came through the east window exactly right, and she smiled the way people smile when they have already decided something and are presenting it as a question. "Walter, I've been thinking," she said. "This room is so big and you're just one person. Ryan and I have Tyler in the small room, and honestly, the 3 of us are practically on top of each other." She tilted her head. "And those stairs, I worry about you. At your age, one bad night, one trip to the bathroom at 2 in the morning. It's a real safety concern." I was 60 years old. I had climbed scaffolding for 38 years. I did not tell her that because she was a guest in my home and I was trying to be gracious. Ryan appeared behind her in the hallway, right on cue. "She's right, Dad. The laundry room downstairs is actually a decent size. We could set it up real nice for you. Ground floor, no stairs close to the kitchen." He said it the way he used to talk me into things when he was a teenager, that particular blend of logic and warmth that made disagreement feel unreasonable. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was a small thing. I told myself that keeping peace was worth more than a room. So on a Tuesday morning in late March, I carried my own mattress down the stairs. I want you to picture that. A 60-year-old man alone dragging the mattress he and his wife had slept on for 11 years off the bed frame, maneuvering it through the hallway, bumping it down 14 steps one at a time, while his son and daughter-in-law were still finishing their coffee at the breakfast table. Ryan offered to help when he heard the third bump. "I've got it," I said, because some things you need to carry yourself so you understand exactly how heavy they are. The laundry room was 8 feet by 10 feet. It had a washer and a dryer along the east wall, a single window that looked out at the base of the back fence, and a light fixture that buzzed faintly when you turned it on. I set my mattress against the opposite wall. I put my nightstand beside it, the one Carol had painted blue the summer we moved to Birch Street, because she said every bedroom needed at least one brave color. I put her photograph on it, the one from our 25th anniversary, where she was laughing at something I'd said that I can't remember anymore, her head thrown back, her silver-streaked hair catching the light. Then I went back upstairs to get the last box. Brianna was in the master bedroom. She had already opened the windows. She was holding one of Carol's throw pillows, a yellow one hand-embroidered, that Carol had made herself the winter before her diagnosis. Brianna turned it over once, examining the stitching, then set it on the chair in the corner with the particular efficiency of someone rearranging inventory. "I'll put her things together in some boxes," she said without looking up. "It'll be easier for you, less to look at." My throat closed around whatever I was going to say. Carol's pillow. Carol's window. "Leave it," I said. The words came out flat and final, the way they do when you are using every available resource just to keep your voice level. Brianna looked at me then. She smiled again, that same smile, the one that lived in the front of her face, while something else entirely moved behind her eyes. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you're comfortable with, Walter." 2 weeks later, Carol's boxes were stacked in the corner of the laundry room. The throw pillow was gone. The anniversary photograph that had hung in the hallway for 3 months was gone. In its place was a framed print of a coastal landscape, gray, water-gray sky, that Brianna said she'd found at Home Goods and thought brightened the space. I stood in front of that print for a long time. I had built furniture for 38 years. I knew the difference between something built to last and something built to fill a space until something better came along. I was beginning to understand which one I was becoming in my own home. It appeared on a Tuesday morning in the second week of May, held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like the state of Ohio. A single sheet of paper laminated because someone had taken the time to drive to an office supply store, feed it through a machine, and seal it in plastic so it would last, so it could not be crumpled, so it could not be thrown away without being deliberate about it. I stood in my kitchen in my socks at 5:45 in the morning and read it the way I used to read a warped board, slowly, carefully looking for the place where the thing had gone wrong. Household schedule. Walter, it said at the top in Brianna's rounded handwriting. Monday, mow front lawn, take out recycling, wipe down bathrooms. Tuesday, vacuum, main floor, wash and fold, laundry, walk, Duke. Wednesday, grocery run, wipe kitchen appliances, sweep garage. Thursday, bathrooms, again mow back lawn if needed, pickup, Tyler from school. Friday, wash both cars, clean windows, take out trash. Duke was their dog. A 3-year-old golden retriever they had brought without asking, who had immediately claimed the couch Carol had picked out, and who shed enough hair in a week to stuff a pillow. I read the list twice. Then I poured my coffee and sat down at my own kitchen table and looked out the window at the yard I had bought with 38 years of calluses, and I tried to locate the version of this situation that made sense. The version I kept landing on was the one where I said something, where I walked upstairs, knocked on the door of my own bedroom, and explained calmly and without raising my voice that I was not the household staff, that I was the man whose name was on the deed, that if they needed a chore chart, they were welcome to make one for themselves. I did not do that. I did not do it because Tyler came downstairs at 6:15 in his dinosaur pajamas, dragging his backpack, his hair pressed flat on one side from sleeping, and he climbed onto the stool beside me and said, "Grandpa Walt, can you make the eggs with the crispy edges?" And I made the eggs with the crispy edges, and he ate them with both elbows on the counter, which Carol would have corrected, and which I let go because he was 8 years old, and his life had been upended twice in 1 year, and some battles are not worth the mourning. So I did the list. I mowed the lawn. I walked Duke. I drove to Kroger on Wednesday mornings and came home with 4 bags of groceries that Brianna sorted through in the way that communicated without words that certain items were not what she would have chosen. I picked Tyler up from Sycamore Elementary on Thursdays, and those drives were the best 20 minutes of my week. Tyler talking about his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, about a kid named Jordan, who was good at kickball, about whether a shark could beat a gorilla in a fight, a question he had clearly been sitting on for some time. 3 weeks in, I forgot to wipe down the kitchen appliances on a Friday. Not deliberately. I had spent the morning fixing a section of fence that had pulled away from the post, actual work, the kind I knew how to do, and by the time I came inside it had slipped my mind. Brianna found me in the laundry room that evening, changing out of my work clothes. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who has been waiting all day to say something and has rehearsed it carefully. "Walter," she said, "I put that schedule up for a reason. We all have to contribute. That's how a household runs." Ryan appeared behind her a moment later. He had his keys in his hand like a man who had timed his arrival to avoid being the one who said the thing, but wanted to be present when it was said. He looked at me, then at the floor, then at the wall beside my head. "She's right, Dad," he said. "We need to be able to count on you." There it was. We need to be able to count on you, in my own house, where I paid the property taxes, where my name was on every piece of paper that mattered, where the mortgage had been paid in full with money I had earned before either of them was managing a household of their own. My jaw tightened. I felt the words I wanted to say line up behind my teeth like a crew waiting for the foreman to give the signal, and I looked past Brianna's shoulder and saw Tyler standing in the hallway, half hidden behind the doorframe, watching. His eyes moved between his parents and me with the careful, exhausted attention of a child who has learned that adult arguments have weather patterns, and that the smart thing is to find cover before it breaks. I breathed out through my nose. The words stood down. "I'll stay on top of it," I said. Brianna nodded, satisfied, and walked away. Ryan squeezed the back of his own neck with one hand, a gesture I recognized, because I had watched him do it since he was 14, whenever he knew he had done something he couldn't quite justify, and then he followed her without looking at me again. I sat down on the edge of my mattress in the laundry room and looked at my hands. Carpenter's hands. Scarred across the knuckles, thick at the base of the fingers, with a crook in the left index from a table saw incident in 1987 that had taken 6 stitches and a story I had told at every job site since. Hands that had built staircases and bookshelves and the cabinet in Ryan's childhood bedroom where he used to hide his baseball cards. These hands, I thought. These hands just apologized for forgetting to wipe a stovetop. The dryer hummed beside me, turning someone else's laundry in the dark. I found out I couldn't get into my own house on a Thursday afternoon in July, with a bag of groceries in each hand and sweat running down the back of my neck. I had driven to Kroger for the Wednesday run a day late because Duke had gotten into something in the backyard Tuesday morning, and I had spent 3 hours at the vet off Wilmington Pike, paying a bill that was not mine to pay for a dog that was not mine to own. The vet's name was Dr. Carla Simmons, and she had kind eyes and did not comment on the fact that the man paying the bill looked like he hadn't slept well in several weeks. I appreciated that. I came home to find the keypad beside the front door, blinking a steady red. I punched in my code, the one I had set myself the week I moved in Carol's birthday, month and year, and the pad beeped twice and stayed red. I tried again, slowly, the way you do when you are certain you are right, but starting to doubt yourself. Red again. I stepped back and looked at the door camera, the small black lens mounted above the keypad that I had installed the previous fall for security. A green light blinked on it steadily, which meant it was working fine. It simply did not recognize my face as a face that belonged here. I stood on my own front porch for 19 minutes. I know it was 19 minutes because I checked my watch when I sat down on the porch steps, and I checked it again when the door finally opened. In between, I knocked twice, rang the doorbell once, and called Ryan's cell phone, which went to voicemail. I left a message that I kept carefully neutral, the way I used to keep my voice neutral on job sites, when a supplier showed up with the wrong materials, and I needed to solve the problem without burning a relationship I still needed. Brianna opened the door eventually. She was in workout clothes, earbuds around her neck, phone in hand, and she looked at me on the porch steps the way you look at a package you forgot you ordered. "Oh, Walter," she said. "Ryan changed the system last week. Security upgrade. There was a vulnerability in the old firmware, apparently." She said firmware the way people say words they have recently learned. "He must have forgotten to update your code. I'll have him fix it tonight." "That would be fine," I said. She stepped back to let me in. I carried my 2 bags of groceries into my kitchen and set them on my counter and stood there for a moment with my hands flat on the cool granite and breathed the way I used to breathe in the shop when a cut went wrong steadily through the nose, giving the anger somewhere to go that wasn't outward. Ryan reset my code that evening. He gave me a new 4-digit number on a Post-it note and said the camera recognition feature needed a few days to calibrate to new faces. New faces. I had lived in this house for 2.5 years. He said it without any apparent awareness of what he had just said, and I took the Post-it note and said thank you, and that was the end of the conversation. The letter arrived 3 days later. It came in a standard white envelope with First National Bank of Dayton printed in the top left corner, my bank where I had kept my accounts for 22 years, where Dale Hutchins and I had finalized the sale of the wood shop, where I had wired the $600,000 for the closing on this house. The letter was a fraud alert notification. It informed me that a new credit account had been opened in my name within the past 30 days, and that per their partnership with the credit monitoring service, they were required to notify me of any new credit inquiries or account openings associated with my Social Security number. I read it standing at the kitchen counter. Then I read it again, sitting down. The following morning, I called the number on the letter and asked for the fraud department. A woman named Donna Reeves answered. She had a steady, professional voice, the kind that has delivered bad news enough times to know how to do it without making it worse. She confirmed that 2 new credit card accounts had been opened in my name in the past 6 weeks. The combined credit limit was $22,000. The current balance across both cards was just over $9,000 and climbing. "Mr. Gaines," she said carefully, "the billing address on both accounts is your current address on Clover Hill Drive. The applications were submitted online using your Social Security number, your date of birth, and your mother's maiden name as the security question." My mother's maiden name. Patricia Hollenbeck. A piece of information that existed in exactly 2 places, my own memory, and the personal documents I kept in the fireproof lockbox in the closet of the laundry room. The closet that did not have a lock. "What do I do?" I asked Donna Reeves, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, which is the particular gift of a lifetime of keeping yourself together in front of other people. She walked me through it precisely: freeze both accounts immediately to stop further charges, file a dispute with each card issuer, place a fraud alert on my credit file with all 3 bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, which would require any lender to verify my identity before opening new accounts. She also suggested I file a report with the Federal Trade Commission at identitytheft.gov and consider a police report if I had reason to believe I knew the source. Identity theft, she explained, was a federal crime under 18 U.S. Code Section 1028, carrying penalties of up to 15 years in federal prison. "Do you have any idea who might have had access to your personal information?" she asked. I looked around my kitchen. The laminated schedule on the refrigerator. The groceries I had bought with my own money sorted by someone else's preference. The post-it note with my new front door code sitting on the counter in Ryan's handwriting. I have some thoughts, I said. Frank DeLuca had lived next door for 11 years and had strong opinions about three things: the Cleveland Browns, the proper way to hang exterior lighting, and the obligation of neighbors to look out for one another. He was 67, retired from 30 years as a licensed electrician out of Cleveland, with thick white hair he kept short, and hands that looked like mine, scarred, wide-palmed, built for work that mattered. His wife Gloria had passed 4 years ago, and he had stayed in the house because, as he told me once over coffee, a man doesn't leave the place where he was happiest just because the happiness has changed shape. I had understood that completely. We had fallen into a Tuesday morning routine sometime in the first year after I moved in coffee on his porch, at 7, 2 cups each, talking about nothing important, in the way that men our age do when the important things have already been said or are too heavy to carry before noon. Frank was the kind of neighbor who noticed things without making you feel watched. He had noticed the SUV in my driveway that didn't move for days. He had noticed the new camera above my front door. He had said nothing yet, but I could see him noticing. The neighborhood summer cookout happened on a Saturday evening in the middle of July, the kind of informal gathering that materializes organically on cul-de-sacs in the Midwest. Someone drags a grill to the end of the driveway, someone else brings potato salad, and suddenly there are 14 people standing in the street, pretending the humidity isn't unbearable. Ryan worked that crowd like a man running for local office. He had always had the gift Carol used to call it his porch light, the way he could switch on warmth and draw people toward it. That evening, he was at full wattage, laughing loud, refilling drinks, clapping shoulders. I stood near the cooler and watched him move through the neighbors the way I used to watch junior carpenters handle clients competent on the surface, performing confidence they hadn't fully earned yet. I heard him before I saw where he had landed. He was talking to the Hendersons from 4 houses down. Dave and Pat, retired school teachers, the kind of people who remember your name and mean it. Ryan had his arm around Dave's shoulder and was gesturing toward my house with his beer. It's been good for him, honestly, Ryan was saying. Dad's at the age where living alone isn't really, it gets to people. He didn't have enough saved up to stay independent long term, so we made it work. He shook his head with the particular expression of a generous man describing a burden he carries gladly. Family takes care of family, right? Pat Henderson looked over at me with an expression I recognized, the soft, careful look people give to someone they have just been told to feel sorry for. I smiled back at her. My face did the smile automatically, the way it had been doing for months, while the rest of me stood very still and cataloged what had just happened. Frank appeared at my elbow 30 seconds later with 2 bottles of water, the way he always materialized when something needed handling. "Walk with me," he said quietly. We went to the far end of the cul-de-sac, out of earshot, where the streetlight hadn't come on yet, and the evening light was going gold and flat across the lawns. Frank handed me a water bottle and looked out at the street for a moment before he spoke. "Walt," he said, "that house, it's yours, right? You bought it yourself." "Every cent," I said. He nodded slowly. "Because the story going around this block tonight is something different." He wasn't looking at me directly, the way careful men deliver difficult things, angled slightly away, giving you room to receive it. "I don't repeat things, but I thought you should know what's being said in your own neighborhood." "I appreciate that," I said. Frank looked at me, then straight on. "Something's not right over there, Walt. I've been watching for 2 months, and something is not right. You know that." I did know that. I had $9,000 of fraudulent credit card debt and a post-it note with my own front door code in my shirt pocket to prove it. "I'm working on it," I said. He held my eyes for a moment, then nodded once, the nod of a man who knows when to push and when to stand alongside. "You need anything," he said. "Anything at all. You come knock." That evening, after the cookout, Brianna set a single sheet of paper on the kitchen table beside my coffee cup. She sat down across from me with her hands folded, and her expression arranged into something that looked like concern. "Walter, I've been meaning to handle something practical with you," she said. "With your age and everything, we just want to make sure that if something ever happened, Ryan could step in and manage things smoothly. Bills, medical decisions, that kind of thing." She slid the paper toward me. "It's just a financial power of attorney. Standard form. Completely routine. A power of attorney in the state of Ohio is a legal document that grants another person, the agent, the authority to make financial and legal decisions on behalf of the person signing, called the principal. A general POA can give the agent broad authority over bank accounts, property transactions, and contracts. For it to be legally valid in Ohio, it must be signed by the principal, witnessed by two adults who are not the agent, and notarized by a commissioned notary public. Without notarization, the document is unenforceable. I had left my reading glasses in the laundry room. Brianna had a pen ready. I thought about Frank's voice at the end of the cul-de-sac. Something is not right. I thought about Donna Reeves reading me account numbers over the phone. I thought about the post-it note. I thought about Carol's pillow in a box in my closet. I picked up the pen. I signed the paper in the wrong place, not the signature line, but the witness line, a line only an agent's witness should sign, which would make the document invalid regardless of what came next. Then I set the pen down and said I was tired, and went to the laundry room and sat on the edge of my mattress and wrote down the date, the time, and every word Brianna had said in Carol's garden notebook, which I had started keeping in the inside pocket of my flannel shirt. She had handed me a weapon and called it paperwork. I intended to keep it. I have always been careful with numbers. 38 years of running a business will do that to a man. I knew my materials costs to the dollar, my labor overhead to the hour, my quarterly tax liability before the accountant ran the figures. Carol used to say I balanced the checkbook the way other men watched football with total absorption and a running commentary she found equal parts impressive and exhausting. After she passed, the numbers became even more important because they were the thing I could still control when everything else was reshaping itself around her absence. So when the August statement arrived from First National and the balance was $912 lower than it should have been, I did not wonder if I had miscounted. I knew I had not miscounted. I sat at the kitchen table with the statement and my notebook and worked through it the way I used to work through a materials discrepancy on a job site methodically, without assumption, following the numbers where they led. My Social Security deposit had landed on the 2nd, as it always did. $1,480, the same as every month. Then on the 4th, a cash withdrawal of $900 from the ATM at the Sunoco station on Feedwire Road, 2 miles from the house. I had not been to the Sunoco on Feedwire Road. I had not withdrawn $900 in cash. I had not, in fact, withdrawn any cash at all in August, because I used my debit card for groceries and paid the utility bills online the way Ryan had set up the autopay system 6 months ago, the system I had agreed to, because he said it was more efficient, and I had been at that point still trying to be reasonable about things. Ryan had set up the autopay system. Ryan had my debit card number. Ryan knew my PIN because I had told it to him the previous November when my hand was unsteady from a flu and I needed him to pick up a prescription. I wrote the date, the amount, and the location in Carol's notebook. Then I went and checked my debit card, which lived in the top drawer of my nightstand. It was there. It had not gone anywhere, which meant Ryan had memorized the number or written it down or photographed it, the kind of thing that takes 3 seconds and leaves no mark. I called First National and reported the transaction as unauthorized. The woman on the line walked me through filing a dispute and flagging the account for unusual activity. I did not say my son's name out loud. I wrote it in the notebook instead, beside the amount, because some things need to be documented before they can be said. That same week, I found the folder in Ryan's desk drawer. I want to be accurate about how this happened, because I am not a man who goes through other people's belongings. I was looking for a roll of packing tape. Brianna had asked me to box up some items from the garage, another task on a list that never seemed to get shorter. And I had checked the kitchen junk drawer and the laundry room shelf and came up empty. Ryan's desk was in the small room off the hallway that had become, over 8 months, something between a home office and a storage space. I opened the top drawer looking for tape. The folder was right there, cream-colored, labeled in Ryan's handwriting, Golden Pines Dad. Golden Pines Assisted Living was a facility I had driven past on Stroop Road without ever thinking about it, the way you drive past things that don't apply to you. Inside the folder was a brochure with photographs of smiling elderly people in sunlit common rooms, a completed application form with my name and date of birth filled in, and a confirmation letter dated 3 weeks prior, acknowledging receipt of a $3,000 deposit to hold a placement spot. $3,000 from my checking account, according to the date on the confirmation withdrawn 9 days ago. I stood in Ryan's office holding the folder and read the application twice. Under Reason for Placement Inquiry in Ryan's handwriting, it said, "Father is exhibiting signs of confusion and difficulty managing daily tasks independently." My hands were not shaking. I want to be clear about that. The hands that had run a table saw for 38 years did not shake. They gripped the folder and they held it steady, while something in my chest went very cold and very quiet, the way a workshop goes quiet after a saw blade stops, that sudden absolute stillness before you assess whether anyone is hurt. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it. I did not take it. I photographed every page with my phone, slowly making sure each image was clear. Then I closed the drawer, went to the garage, found the packing tape on the 3rd shelf, where it had been the entire time, and went back to boxing up items from my own garage like a man with nothing on his mind. That evening, Tyler found me in the backyard pulling weeds from the flower bed along the fence, the one where I had planted Carol's tomatoes. He dropped down cross-legged in the grass beside me the way children do without preamble, with a Lego figure in each hand that he was conducting some private battle between. We worked in companionable quiet for a while, me pulling weeds, him narrating a conflict between what appeared to be a knight and an astronaut. Then he set both figures down in the grass and looked at me with Carol's eyes, the directness that skipped a generation and landed whole in an 8-year-old's face. "Grandpa Walt," he said, "how come Dad says this is gonna be your house for now, but after a while it's gonna be ours?" The weed in my hand tore at the root. I looked at my grandson sitting in Carol's garden in the long August light, his question hanging in the air between us with the perfect, devastating innocence of something said without any understanding of what it means. "Where did you hear that, buddy?" I asked, and my voice came out even, which was the hardest thing I had done all month. Tyler shrugged, already reaching for the night again. "Dad said it on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen." He lined the figures up on his knee. "Is it true?" I pulled another weed. The roots came up with a clump of dark soil, and I turned it over in my hand and looked at it for a moment. "No," I said. "It's not true." Tyler nodded, satisfied, and went back to his battle. He had the uncomplicated trust of a child who believes what his grandfather tells him, and that trust sat in my chest like a coal, warm and burning at the same time. I stayed in the garden until the light was gone, writing nothing down, because some things you don't need to write to remember. There is a particular kind of sleeplessness that isn't about the body. My body was tired enough. 8 months of 5 o'clock mornings of mowing and hauling and walking a dog that wasn't mine had seen to that. But my mind had developed the habit of running inventory at 2 in the morning, going back through the past weeks the way I used to go back through a job estimate, looking for the line where the numbers stopped adding up. It was a Thursday night in early September when I opened my laptop. I had not been looking for anything specific. I told myself I was checking the weather, the way men tell themselves things at 2 in the morning when they know they are doing something else entirely. I opened the browser. I typed the address of my house into the search bar, not out of suspicion, just the reflex of a man who had paid $600,000 for something, and still sometimes needed to confirm it was real. The listing appeared on the 4th search result. Zillow. 3 photographs, the front of the house, the kitchen, the backyard. My backyard where Carol's tomatoes were still growing along the fence. The listing price was $649,000. The description read, charming 2-story colonial in sought-after Dayton neighborhood. Motivated seller. Flexible closing timeline. Contact agent for private showings. There was no agent. There was a contact button that led to a form, and when I filled it in with a fake name and email address and submitted it, an auto-reply came back within 4 minutes from an account called Dayton Home Sales 828 with a Gmail address asking for a $500 good faith deposit to schedule a showing and confirm serious buyer intent. I sat with that for a long time. What Ryan and Brianna had done was not complicated. They had listed my house for sale on one of the most visited real estate platforms in the country, using photographs anyone could take through a window or during an open plan afternoon attached to an account designed to collect deposit money from people who believed they were buying a home. It is called deed fraud when the seller has no legal right to the property, and listing fraud when the property itself is misrepresented. Both are federal crimes. Both carry significant prison time, and both, I was beginning to understand, were merely the most visible part of what had been happening in this house for the better part of a year. I thought about the pattern of the last 8 months. It had not been random. That was the thing I kept returning to, the thing that made my jaw ache from holding it tight in the dark. Every step had been deliberate and sequenced. Move the old man downstairs to establish that he needed assistance. Create the chore schedule to document that he was dependent. Change the door code to demonstrate that he couldn't manage his own security. Submit the POA paperwork to capture his legal authority. Open credit cards in his name to damage his financial standing. Arrange the cognitive assessment to create a medical record questioning his capacity. Reserve the assisted living placement to have a destination ready. And now list the house so that when Walter Gaines was quietly relocated to Golden Pines on Stroop Road, the property could be liquidated before anyone thought to ask whose name was still on the deed. It was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a project. I had built things for 38 years. I knew what a plan looked like when someone had drawn it up carefully and was working it in sequence. This one had been drawn up carefully. What I had not fully understood until that moment was that the anger I had been swallowing for 8 months, pressing down, smoothing over, converting into patience for Tyler's sake, and silence for the family's sake had not gone anywhere. It had accumulated the way stress accumulates in a load-bearing joint, invisibly, incrementally, until the night you are sitting alone at 2 in the morning, looking at photographs of your own backyard on a fraudulent real estate listing, and something in the joint finally reaches its limit. I did not slam the laptop. I did not put my fist through a wall. I am not that kind of man, and I was not going to become one on their schedule. I reached under my mattress and pulled out Carol's garden notebook, the small one with the green cover and her handwriting on the first 12 pages, recording soil pH and planting dates, and the names of the zinnia varieties she had ordered from a catalog in the winter of 2020, the last winter before the diagnosis. I turned to the first blank page, which came after an entry about mulching the rosebush that said simply, "April is the right time if you pay attention." I wrote the date at the top, September 7th, 2024. Then I wrote down everything. The Zillow listing URL, listing price, contact account, the $500 deposit scheme, the ATM withdrawals, dates, amounts, locations, the Golden Pines folder, application date, deposit amount, the phrase Ryan had written under reason for placement, the credit card's account numbers from the fraud alert letter, current balances, the POA document date presented where I had signed deliberately wrong, the chore schedule still laminated on the refrigerator upstairs, the door code on a post-it in Ryan's handwriting, the cognitive assessment appointment I had found referenced in an email notification that had come to the family tablet scheduled for October with a Dr. Warren Fitch at Kettering Health under the referral name of Brianna Gaines, next of kin. I wrote for 2 hours. My handwriting got smaller as I went, the way it does when I am concentrating, filling every line to the margin. The way Carol never did, she had always left space on the page, said she liked room to add things later. I left no room. There was nothing left to add. I had the whole picture now, and it fit together, the way a well-made joint fits precisely without gaps, each piece holding the next one in place. When I finished, I held the notebook for a moment in both hands. Carol's handwriting on one end, mine on the other, 12 pages of a garden between us. "I see it now," I said out loud, to no one, to her, to the laundry room that hummed and smelled like fabric softener and was absolutely not where a man like me was supposed to end up. Then I put the notebook back under the mattress and lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Harold Stevens, my oldest friend, who had called me 2 weeks ago from a hospital in Indianapolis, with the particular voice of a man who is telling you something he cannot make easier by how he says it. Hap was dying, and I was going to have to leave this house to go say goodbye, which meant for the first time in 8 months, I was going to be somewhere else. Somewhere I could make phone calls that no one in this house would overhear. Somewhere I could walk into a bank and sit across from a human being and spread these pages on a desk and say out loud what had been done. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to leaving. Harold Stevens and I had been friends for 41 years, which is long enough to know a man, the way you know a piece of wood. You have worked with many times, his grain, his weight, the particular way he responds to pressure. We had met on a job site outside Columbus in the fall of 1983, 2 young carpenters on the same crew eating lunch on the tailgate of his truck because neither of us had brought enough chairs. By the end of that week, we were finishing each other's sentences about joint angles and arguing about the designated hitter rule. And by the end of that year, we were the kind of friends who don't need to explain themselves to each other, which is the rarest kind there is. He had been at my wedding. I had been at his. He had sat with me in the hospital parking lot the night Carol's first scan came back and said nothing for 40 minutes, which was exactly the right thing. He had called me in late August with the voice I recognized. Pancreatic cancer, the same as Carol, which felt like a cruelty so specific it had to be accidental. Stage 4. He said it the way Hap said everything, straight, without decoration, giving the words their weight, but not 1 ounce more. "You're going to want to come before it gets to the point where coming feels like saying goodbye," he said. "Come while it still feels like a visit." I had driven to Indianapolis on a Monday in early October, 9 months of accumulated paperwork in Carol's notebook, under my arm, and 3 days of clean clothes in a bag on the back seat. Hap was at home in the bedroom his wife Linda had painted yellow, the year they retired, propped up on pillows, with a mystery novel face down on the blanket, and a cup of tea going cold on the nightstand. He looked smaller than the last time I had seen him, the way illness redistributes a man pulling the substance inward. But his eyes were the same sharp and direct, and faintly amused, as if the world was still doing things he found interesting. "Walt," he said, when I sat down in the chair beside the bed, "you look terrible." "You look worse," I said. He laughed, which turned into a cough which he waved off impatiently. "Linda tells me you've had some trouble at home," he said. He never wasted time on the approach when he could go straight to the thing, I told him. All of it beginning with the rainy night Ryan arrived, and ending with the Zillow listing I had found at 2 a.m. in September. I kept my voice level the way I had kept it for 9 months, and I watched Hap's face go through several things without interrupting once, which was one of his great gifts. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have the notebook with you, in the car. Good." He shifted against the pillows, and the effort it cost him was visible. "Walt, I built a deck for a man in Fishers about 12 years ago. Nice guy, retired school principal. His son had moved in and was running the same play on him. By the time he figured it out, the son had gotten himself added to the deed." He looked at me steadily. "Don't wait until they've had time to file anything." I drove to First National Bank of Dayton on the Tuesday morning before the funeral, which was held on Wednesday afternoon at a Lutheran church on the north side of Indianapolis that smelled like old wood and candle wax, and reminded me powerfully and unexpectedly of every quiet morning I had spent in my own shop before the crews arrived. The service was simple. Hap had requested it that way, no extended eulogy, no slideshow. A hymn, a scripture reading, 20 minutes of a pastor who had clearly known him well, saying things that were true. Linda sat in the front pew with her daughters on either side of her, and I sat 3 rows back and looked at the back of her head and thought about the particular courage it takes to love someone for 40 years and then stay in the yellow bedroom after they are gone. Afterward, I stood in the church parking lot with a cup of weak coffee and called Margaret Owens. Margaret had been my family attorney for 16 years. She had handled the woodshop sale, the house closing, Carol's estate. She was 58, methodical, with a voice that moved at the same careful pace, whether she was discussing a routine contract or a serious problem, which I had always found reassuring. She answered on the second ring. I told her I needed an appointment. I told her it was not routine. She asked me 3 questions. Was I safe? Was the property still in my name? Did I have documentation? I said yes to all 3. She said, "Come Thursday morning, 9 o'clock," and I said I would be there. At the bank, Donna Reeves met me at the counter, with the careful expression of someone who had been expecting this visit. She pulled up my account history on her screen and turned it so I could see, and together we went through 14 months of transactions, the way you go through a damaged piece of timber, slowly marking every place the integrity had been compromised. The ATM withdrawals were there, $900 each, regular as a metronome, always the same Sunoco station on Feedwire Road, always the 3rd or 4th of the month. We flagged 2 of these internally, Donna said quietly, leaning forward over the counter. The pattern was consistent enough that our fraud detection system marked them for review, but without a complaint from the account holder, we couldn't act. She looked at me directly. "I'm glad you came in, Mr. Gaines." I filed the formal fraud complaint at the window, signed the dispute forms, and arranged for the account to be restructured, new account number, new debit card, new PIN that existed only in my memory. I also requested a complete printed statement, history, going back 18 months, stamped and certified, which Donna produced and placed in a manila envelope with the bank's seal. I walked out of First National with that envelope under my arm and stood on the sidewalk in the October air and felt for the first time in 9 months that I was standing on ground that was actually solid. Thursday morning, Margaret's office smelled like old paper and good coffee. I sat across from her desk and opened Carol's notebook and laid it flat between us, and she read it without speaking for 11 minutes while I watched the second hand on the clock above her door. When she looked up, her expression had not changed. That was the particular quality of Margaret Owens, that her face did not perform reactions, but her eyes had gone very focused and very still. "Walter," she said, "what they've done has a name, and there are papers for every single one of them." She was reaching for her legal pad when my phone rang. The screen said Frank DeLuca. Margaret's hand was still moving toward her legal pad when I held up one finger and answered the phone. Frank DeLuca did not open with hello. Frank had never been a man who wasted the first 10 seconds of a conversation on ceremony, which was one of the things I had always appreciated about him. What he said, in the particular voice he used when he had been sitting on something and had finally decided it needed to be said, was this: "Walt, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." "Go ahead," I said. He had been at the mailbox that morning Tuesday, 2 days before I was sitting in Margaret's office when Ryan had come out of the house and walked over to talk. Frank said Ryan had seemed expansive, the way men get when they are pleased with themselves and need an audience for it. He had talked about renovations he was planning, a fire pit in the backyard, new composite decking on the front porch. He had talked about the neighborhood, about property values, about the way Clover Hill Drive had appreciated since I had bought in. And then Frank said Ryan had put his hand on the mailbox post, the way men plant a flag in something, and said casually, as if it were already settled, that the house was going to be officially in his name before the end of the year, that the paperwork was basically handled, that the old man had been struggling more than people knew, and the family had made some decisions that were really in everyone's best interest. Frank stopped there. I could hear him breathing on the other end, that careful, deliberate breath of a man who has said the hard thing and is waiting to find out what it costs. I held the phone very still against my ear. The old man. That was me. The man who had paid $600,000 in cash for the house Ryan was standing at the mailbox describing as his own. The man who had carried his own mattress down 14 stairs. The man who had been walking their dog and mowing their lawn and picking up their groceries for 9 months, while his son told the neighbors he was a dependent who couldn't manage his own affairs. "Frank," I said, and my voice came out lower and steadier than I expected, the way a foundation beam sounds when you knock on it, and it is still solid despite everything built on top of it. How many people heard him say that? Dave Henderson was there. Pat came out partway through. The Okafor kid from the end of the block. Frank paused. "Walt," he said it like it was done, like the conversation was about what color to paint the porch. I looked at Margaret across her desk. She had not moved. She had the particular stillness of an attorney who understands that she is now hearing one side of a phone call that is directly relevant to the matter in front of her, and who is cataloging every word. "Frank," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "That's the only kind I have," he said. "If I need you to be somewhere specific at a specific time in the next few days, can you do that?" There was a pause, not a long one. Frank DeLuca had spent 30 years as an electrician. He understood that some jobs required you to show up without a full explanation of why, because the why would be apparent when you got there. "Tell me when and where," he said. I thanked him and ended the call. Margaret was already writing on her legal pad, her pen moving in that compact, efficient script that meant she was building something. I sat back down across from her and put my phone face down on the desk between us. "Change your flight," she said without looking up. "Go home tomorrow, not Sunday." "Already thinking it," I said. She looked up then. Margaret Owens had a face that did not give things away easily, which had made her an excellent attorney and occasionally a difficult person to read in the 16 years I had known her. But there was something in her expression at that moment that I recognized, not anger, not alarm, but the specific focused energy of a person who has been handed a problem that is clearly defined and completely solvable and is already 3 steps into the solution. "Here's what I am going to need from you," she said, and she turned the legal pad so I could see the list she had started. Certified bank statements. I had those still in the manila envelope from First National. The notebook, I had that. Photographs of the Zillow listing on my phone. The Golden Pines folder photographed page by page. The POA document I had signed in the wrong place, which she said actually worked in our favor because it demonstrated intent without creating a valid instrument. The credit card fraud reports from Donna Reeves. The cognitive assessment referral I had found in the tablet notification. She worked through the list. The way I used to work through a materials order systematically, nothing skipped, every item confirmed before moving to the next. When she reached the end, she set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk. "Walter," she said carefully, "what Ryan and Brianna have done constitutes elder financial abuse under Ohio Revised Code, Section 2913.02, which covers theft by deception, and potentially Section 2913.45, which covers passing bad checks and financial exploitation of an elderly person. The identity theft charges fall under federal jurisdiction. The deed fraud listing carries additional state and federal exposure." She said it the way she said everything, at the same careful pace, giving every word its full weight. "None of this is borderline. These are serious crimes with serious consequences." "I understand," I said. "Good." She picked her pen back up. "Now, they're having a gathering at the house this weekend. Frank had mentioned it on the phone, a backyard barbecue Saturday afternoon, people from the neighborhood, some of Ryan's friends. Brianna had been talking about it for 2 weeks. "Saturday," I said. Margaret wrote the word down and underlined it once. Then she looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with an expression I had not seen from her before, something between professional satisfaction and something warmer, more personal. "Then Saturday works," she said. "I'll bring a colleague and the formal notices. You bring the folder." She paused. "And Walter, go home tomorrow. Park in the driveway. Walk in the front door. Let them see you come back." I drove to the airport that evening and stood at the Delta counter and changed my return flight from Sunday to Friday morning. The agent asked if there was a reason for the change, and I told her a family matter had come up, which was accurate in every possible sense. In the car in the airport parking structure, I opened my wallet and looked at the photograph I kept behind my license. Carol at the kitchen table on Birch Street, reading, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, completely unaware that I was taking the picture. The way she always looked best. Not performing happiness. Just in it. "I'm coming home tomorrow," I said to her. "For real this time." I put the wallet away and sat for a moment in the dark of the parking structure, listening to the distant sound of planes, and felt the particular calm that settles over a man when the waiting is finished and the work is about to begin. I turned onto Clover Hill Drive at 2:30 on Friday afternoon, and the first thing I noticed was that someone had moved Carol's tomato cages. They were stacked against the side fence now, bundled with zip ties out of the way. The bed along the back fence where I had planted them in her memory had been cleared and raked flat, the dark soil turned over and bare, ready for something else entirely. A fire pit maybe, or composite decking, or whatever Ryan had described to Dave Henderson at the mailbox as the next improvement to the property that was going to be officially his before the end of the year. I sat in the rental car in my own driveway for 30 seconds and looked at that bare patch of earth, and I felt something move through me that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them, in the place where the two things press against each other, and you have to decide which one you are going to let out. I chose neither. I got out of the car. Brianna was in the kitchen when I came through the front door, my front door, which now opened with a code I had been issued on a post-it note. She was at the counter with her phone in one hand and a catering supply list in the other, and she looked up when she heard me come in with the particular expression of someone whose schedule has been interrupted by something that wasn't on it. "You're back early, Tone," she said. It was not a question, and it was not a welcome. It was an observation delivered in the tone of a woman shouting that the weather had not cooperated with her plans. "Funeral ran shorter than expected," I said, which was not entirely untrue. She looked at me for a moment, with those careful eyes, running some internal calculation I could not see the result of. Then she set down her phone and picked up something from the counter beside the refrigerator, a folded piece of fabric, dark gray, worn at the collar, and held it out toward me. "The guys are coming at 4, she said. "Ryan's friends, a few neighbors. We're doing a proper backyard setup." She extended the fabric another inch, her arm straight, her expression leaving no room for interpretation. "Could you change into this?" The carpenter clothes read a little rough for company. It was a server's uniform, the kind worn by catering staff at mid-range banquet halls, dark gray polyester, with a small breast pocket, slightly too large in the shoulders, with a grease stain near the second button that no amount of washing had fully addressed. I did not ask where it had come from. I did not want to know. I took it from her hand. She turned back to her list before I had even left the room, already moving on to the next item, the way you move on from a minor logistical task that has been completed satisfactorily. I carried the uniform down the stairs to the laundry room and sat on the edge of my mattress and held it in my hands and looked at it. There is a moment in carpentry when you are about to make a cut that you know is right, but that will change the piece permanently. You measure twice, you check the angle, you position the blade, and then before you start the saw, you take one breath because what comes next cannot be undone. I sent Margaret a text. "One word, tonight." Her reply came back in 40 seconds. One word, ready. I changed into the uniform. I buttoned it to the collar and rolled the sleeves to the elbow, the way I always rolled my sleeves when I was working, and I looked at myself in the small mirror above the laundry sink. A 60-year-old man in a borrowed server's jacket in the basement of the house he had paid for with the work of his hands, and I made myself hold that image for a full 10 seconds. Then I went upstairs and got to work. The backyard had been transformed in the 2 days I had been gone. A long folding table covered in a craft paper runner ran along the side fence. String lights had been strung between the back porch posts and the old oak at the property line. A gas grill the size of a small car had appeared on the patio rented from somewhere still in its protective wrap on one side. And in the center of the yard where I had planted Carol's tomatoes, where the cages had stood through 2 growing seasons, where the soil had been dark and alive and smelled like the best version of an Ohio summer morning, someone had set up a Traeger smoker on a folding stand. Tyler was on the back porch steps carefully arranging plastic cups into a pyramid. He looked up when I came outside, and his face did the thing it always did when he saw me, opened up completely without reservation, the way only children's faces do. "Grandpa Walt," he said. "You're back." "I'm back, buddy," I said. He looked at the uniform without comment, the way children accept the inexplicable things adults do, and went back to his pyramid. I stood on the porch and looked at the yard and at the bare patch where Carol's garden had been, and I thought about what Margaret had said in her office. Let them see you come back. I picked up the tongs from the prep table beside the Traeger and checked the fuel level and began arranging the charcoal the way I had arranged materials on job sites for 38 years, methodically, deliberately, with the full understanding that the quality of the preparation determined the quality of everything that came after. Frank's truck appeared at the curb at 3:45. He did not come into the backyard. He parked, cut the engine, and stayed in the cab, a man on standby, waiting for a signal he had agreed to come for without needing to know every detail. I could see him in the driver's mirror from where I stood at the grill. He had brought a thermos, which meant he had planned to wait as long as necessary. That was Frank DeLuca. 30 years as an electrician, which meant 30 years of showing up to jobs that weren't finished and making them finished. Ryan's friends began arriving at 4. I heard them coming through the house, voices the specific register of men in their mid-30s who have not seen each other in a while, loud in the particular way of people who are performing ease. Ryan's laugh came through the screen door. Before he did that big laugh, he switched on like a light. And when he came outside and saw me standing at the grill, he did the briefest hesitation, one step, barely a pause, quickly recovered. "Dad," he said. "Didn't know you were back." "Got in this afternoon," I said. I kept my eyes on the grill and my hands on the tongs. Thought I'd help out. He looked at the uniform for half a second, and something moved behind his eyes that I recognized relief. He had expected resistance. He had not gotten it. And in the absence of resistance, he relaxed, which was exactly what I needed him to do. He went back to his friends. I turned the charcoal and thought about load-bearing joints and how much pressure they could take before the thing they were holding began to show the strain. The guests would be here in 2 hours. Margaret would be here in 3. The heat came from the charcoal, not the sky. October in Dayton runs cool, low 60s by late afternoon, the kind of air that smells like dry leaves and distant rain and makes you grateful for a flannel shirt. But I was standing 18 inches from a full charcoal load on a Traeger the size of a workbench, and after 40 minutes the heat had soaked through the server's jacket and settled into my shoulders the way heat does when it has nowhere else to go. My face felt tight. The back of my neck was damp. I had been on my feet since 2 in the afternoon, and it was now closing in on 5, and I had not eaten since a gas station sandwich outside Indianapolis that morning. I did not move from the grill. There were 11 guests. I counted them the way I used to count crew members at the start of a job, quickly, accurately, without appearing to. 7 men, 4 women ranging from their early 30s to mid-40s. The particular demographic of people who had gone to college with Ryan or worked adjacent to him in the years when his business was doing well enough to generate the kind of friendships that survive a downturn. They had come through the back gate with coolers and wine bottles and the easy noise of people who expected to be comfortable. None of them introduced themselves to me. I was the man at the grill. I was the help. And in the way that help becomes invisible when it is functioning correctly, I ceased to exist as a person and became instead a reliable source of cooked meat, which was, I understood by now, exactly how I had been functioning in this house for the better part of a year. Ryan moved through the party the way he always moved through rooms, his porch light on full, his laugh available to everyone, his hand finding shoulders and elbows with the practiced warmth of a man who understands that social ease is a form of currency. He had set up the speakers on the back porch, and the music was just loud enough to fill the spaces between conversations without interrupting them. Brianna circulated with a white wine in one hand and a hosting smile that did not reach her eyes, directing traffic, managing the table, keeping the logistics running with the quiet efficiency that I had once early on mistaken for kindness. She refilled drinks. She did not refill mine. I had been standing at the grill for an hour and 15 minutes when Ryan settled into the chair at the head of the folding table with 3 of his friends and leaned back in the particular way of a man who is comfortable being watched. I could hear them from the grill. The music was loud enough to blur the edges, but not the words, not when you were practiced at listening, the way I had become practiced at listening. He was talking about the house. Not in the careful, coded way he talked about it in front of me. Without me in the conversation, or rather with me present, but categorized as furniture, He talked about it the way a man talks about something he already owns. The fire pit he was going to put in the spring, the master bathroom renovation, the deck he had been pricing in composite materials since August. He gestured toward the back fence, toward the bare patch where Carol's tomatoes had been, and said something about mature landscaping and resale value that made one of his friends nod with the appreciative attention of someone being invited to imagine a future. "What about the old man?" one of the friends asked. Not unkindly, just practically the way you ask about a piece of furniture you are not sure where to put. Ryan picked up his beer. "Dad's situation is being handled," he said. "There's a good place on Stroop Road. Nice facility. He'll have his own room, people his age activities." He said activities the way people say it when they mean the opposite of a life. "It's the right move for him. He needs more support than we can give him at home." At home. My home, where I was standing at his grill in a borrowed jacket, turning his Wagyu beef while he described my relocation to a facility on Stroop Road as a practical matter that had been thoughtfully arranged. I turned the meat and did not look up. There is a technique in Finnish carpentry called reading the grain. Before you make any cut, you study the direction the wood fibers are running, the pattern the tree built over decades of growing. If you cut with the grain, the wood responds cleanly. If you cut against it, it splits in ways you did not plan for and cannot predict. I had learned this at 22 from a foreman named Bill Archer, who said it the way men of his generation said important things, once quietly, without repetition, trusting you to remember it. "You do not rush the grain," Bill had said. "You read it first." I had been reading the grain in this house for 9 months. I knew exactly which direction it ran. I knew where the weak lines were and where the pressure had been building, and precisely where, if you applied the right force at the right angle, the whole thing would give cleanly instead of splintering. Tyler came out the back door at 5:15 with a paper plate of crackers and cheese that he had assembled himself, the crackers slightly uneven, the cheese in pieces that suggested enthusiastic rather than precise cutting, and he walked straight to me at the grill and held the plate up. "Mom said you probably didn't eat," he said with the directness of a child stating a fact that adults have been too polite to mention. I looked at that plate. Then I looked at my grandson in his weekend clothes, his hair still pressed flat from the car ride, holding crackers and cheese toward a man in a server's uniform who was standing at a grill in the backyard of a house that had his grandmother's name written into every dollar that bought it. My chest did something complicated and specific that I did not have a clean word for. "Thank you, buddy," I said. I ate 2 crackers standing at the grill. They were the best thing I had tasted all day. At 5:45, Ryan stood up from the table and tapped his beer bottle with a knuckle, a small sound enough to draw the attention of the people closest to him. He was settling into something. I had seen this posture before, the particular arrangement of a man who is about to hold court and knows it. Across the yard near the gate, I heard the latch click. I did not look up from the grill, but I heard it, the specific sound of Frank DeLuca's gate latch, which I had unlatched and relatched 100 times in 2 years of Tuesday morning coffees, and which had a particular 2-beat click that I would have recognized anywhere. Frank was here. And if Frank was here, Margaret was not far behind. I set the tongs down on the grill edge and rolled my right sleeve up one more fold, the way I always did when a job was about to get serious, and I waited for Ryan to begin. Before I reveal the final confrontation and how I turned the tables, comment the word justice below, so I know you are still here with me. And please note, the upcoming part includes some fictional elements and may not be entirely factual. If you prefer not to listen, you can turn off the video right here. Ryan did not tap his bottle again. He simply stood, and the table quieted around him, the way tables do when the person standing is the one who has been buying the drinks. He had the particular posture of a man who has rehearsed something, without admitting to himself that he rehearsed it, shoulders back, weight easy, one hand in his pocket, and the other holding his beer loosely at the side, the stance of a man performing casualness for an audience he has assembled. I had watched him develop that posture over 35 years. I had once found it charming. I just want to say, he started, and his voice carried the warmth of a man who knows exactly what he is doing with warmth. How good it is to have people in this yard, in this house. He looked around at his friends with the slow, inclusive sweep of a man counting what he owns. We've put a lot into this place, and it feels like home now. It really does. I turned a piece of Wagyu on the grill and did not look up. Some people spend their whole lives looking for a place that feels like this. Ryan continued, and his voice had dropped into the register he used for things he wanted to sound spontaneous. And I think we found it. And I think we're just getting started. He raised his beer. His friends raised theirs. That was when my hands began to shake. Not from emotion. From the simple arithmetic of a body that had been standing for 4 hours without food, beyond 2 crackers that had driven from Indianapolis that morning, that had been running on the particular fuel of controlled anger and careful patience for 9 months, and was now at 5:47 on a Saturday evening in October, approaching the end of what it could sustain without something giving way. The piece of Wagyu was the last one on the upper rack. I reached for it with the tongs, and my right hand, the hand with the crooked index finger from the table, saw in 1987, the hand that had held steady through 38 years of cuts and joints and finishes, trembled once precisely the wrong amount, and the piece slipped. It hit the patio stone with a sound that was not loud, but was in the particular acoustics of a yard that had gone quiet at the wrong moment, completely audible. Brianna's head turned first. She had been standing near the drinks table with 2 of the women guests, and she crossed the patio in 4 steps with her wine glass still in her hand, and looked down at the piece of meat on the stone, and then up at me with an expression I had not seen directed at me before. Not the careful management, not the arranged concern, but something rawer and more honest. The look of a person whose patience with a malfunctioning appliance has finally run out. "Pick it up," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "Don't waste good meat." The yard went still in the way that yards go still when something has been said in public that was meant for private, that collective intake of breath disguised as continued conversation. I looked at the piece of meat on the stone. I looked at Brianna. I did not pick it up. Ryan came off the deck in 3 strides, and I heard him coming, before I saw him, the particular rhythm of his footsteps when he had decided to handle something. He reached past me and took the tongs from my hand, with a grip that was harder than necessary, and when he straightened up, he was close enough that I could see the vein at his temple that appeared when he was working to keep his voice controlled. He pointed the tongs at my face. "You want to know your options," he said, and his voice had dropped to the register that meant he had stopped performing for the audience and was saying what he actually meant. "You can be useful here, or you can get out of this house." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "This $600,000 house that you are living in on our goodwill." Our goodwill. The words landed in the specific way that certain things land when you have been waiting for them without knowing you were waiting. Not as a shock, but as a confirmation, the way a crack in a beam sounds when the weight finally finds it. The yard was completely silent. I did not look at Ryan. I did not look at Brianna. I looked at the corner of the yard, near the gate that Frank had come through, where Tyler was standing, with his back against the fence, and both hands flat against the wood behind him, and his eyes. Carol's eyes, in an 8-year-old's face moving between his father and me, with the expression of a child who has understood in this moment that something is happening that cannot be taken back. He was not crying. He was very still in the particular way of children who have gone past the point of crying and into something quieter and more permanent. His paper plate of crackers was still in his hand. He had not moved since his father raised his voice. I held my grandson's gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to see him, long enough for him to see that I was still standing. Then I bent down, picked up the piece of wagyu from the stone, and carried it to the trash can at the edge of the patio. I dropped it in. I straightened up. I reached behind my back and unknotted the server's apron I had put it on at some point in the past 2 hours, without registering when, and I folded it once along the center seam and set it on the edge of the grill. Ryan was still holding the tongs. His friends were very interested in their drinks. "Excuse me," I said, not to Ryan, not to Brianna, to no one in particular and to everyone. I walked into the house through the back door, and the screen door closed behind me with the specific sound of a thing that has been doing its job reliably for years and will continue to do so long after the people arguing in the yard are gone. I went to the laundry room. I reached under the mattress. I took out Carol's notebook, and then I reached to the back of the shelf above the washer behind the box of dryer sheets, and I took out the leather satchel, dark brown brass clasps worn to a shine from years of handling that Carol had given me for our 20th anniversary, which I had been keeping there for 3 days, already packed. I looked at my watch. 6:02. Margaret Owens would be at the gate in exactly 58 minutes. I stood in the laundry room for 90 seconds. Not because I was hesitating. I want to be clear about that. I had not hesitated since Thursday morning in Margaret's office, and I was not going to start now in a room that smelled like fabric softener and had a buzzing light fixture and measured 8 feet by 10 and had been my bedroom for the past 7 months, in the house I had paid for with the accumulated labor of my entire adult life. I stood there for 90 seconds because I wanted to be certain of my own stillness before I walked back out. There is a state that experienced carpenters reach before a difficult cut, not calm exactly, but something more precise than calm. Every variable accounted for, every measurement confirmed, the blade positioned, the material secured. What remains is simply the execution of something you have already completed in your mind, and the body follows because the body knows its job. I picked up the satchel by its worn brass handle and walked upstairs. The yard had not recovered. That was the first thing I noticed when I pushed open the screen door, the particular acoustic quality of a social gathering that has been interrupted and does not know whether to resume. Conversations had restarted, but they had the careful, slightly elevated register of people performing normalcy over something that has unsettled them. Ryan was back at the table with his friends talking with the volume of a man who is working to reset the temperature of a room. Brianna stood near the drinks table with her arms crossed and a fixed expression that was managing several things at once. Nobody looked at me when I came out. Then they did. It was the satchel that did it, or rather the combination of the satchel and the fact that I had removed the server's jacket and was now in my own shirt, the flannel I had worn on the drive from Indianapolis, which felt more like myself than anything I had put on in 7 months. I walked to the folding table at the center of the yard, Brianna's table with its craft paper runner and its carefully arranged platters, and I set the satchel down on the end of it, with the particular deliberateness of a man placing something that has weight and means to keep it there. The conversations stopped. Ryan's head came up from across the table. His eyes went to the satchel, then to my face, and I watched him try to read what he was looking at. He had spent 35 years knowing my face, and he could not read it right now, which I could see was frightening him in a way that his own anger had not managed to frighten me. "Dad," he said, "what are you doing?" I did not answer him yet. I set my hand flat on the top of the satchel and looked around the yard, at the 11 people who were now all looking at me, at the man they had not introduced themselves to, at the help, at the old man whose situation was being handled, and I felt the specific clarifying quality of a moment that has been a long time coming and has finally undeniably arrived. The gate latch clicked. The two-beat sound I knew. Frank came through first. He was in his work clothes, dark jeans, a canvas jacket, boots, and he walked to the side of the yard near the fence and stood there without speaking, his hands in his pockets, his presence constituting a statement without requiring words. Behind him came a woman in a charcoal blazer with a document folder under her arm and the measured, unhurried walk of someone who has been in difficult rooms before and knows that pace communicates authority more reliably than volume. Margaret Owens had never been to a backyard barbecue. She walked as though she had planned the route. Brianna's eyes tracked Margaret from the gate to the center of the yard, and I watched the calculation happen in real time behind her face, the blazer, the folder, the practiced walk, Frank DeLuca as escort, and I watched her arrive at a conclusion that drained approximately 3 shades of certainty from her expression. "Who is that?" she said, and her voice had lost its managed quality for the first time since February. "My attorney," I said. Ryan came out of his chair, not aggressively, not yet, but with the particular energy of a man who has just felt the ground shift under him and is trying to locate something solid. He came around the table and stopped 6 feet from me, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were moving between me and Margaret and Frank, and the satchel on the table with the rapid, slightly desperate quality of a man who is doing math and not liking the answer. "Dad," he said again. And this time the word came out differently, smaller, with a question buried in it that he did not know how to ask directly. I opened the satchel. I took out Carol's notebook first, the green-covered garden book, with her handwriting on the first 12 pages, and mine filling every page after, and I set it on the table. Then the manila envelope from First National Bank, stamped and certified. Then the photographs I had printed at the FedEx office on North Main that morning. Before I drove home, the Zillow listing, the Golden Pines folder, the POA document, with my signature in the wrong place, the credit card fraud reports from Donna Reeves. Then the certified copy of the warranty deed, which Margaret had pulled from the Greene County Recorder's office on Thursday, and which had my name on it in the clean, unambiguous typography of a legal document that has been doing its job correctly since the day it was filed. I laid each item on the craft paper runner in a row, the way I used to lay out tools before starting a job, everything visible, everything in its place, nothing hidden. Then I looked at my son. He was staring at the row of documents with the expression of a man watching a wall come down that he had believed was load-bearing. His color had changed. Not all at once, gradually, the way color leaves wood when you strip the finish, revealing what was underneath the whole time. "Ryan," I said, and my voice came out, at the same register. It always did, not loud, not theatrical, just the voice I had used for 38 years to tell people what needed to be done. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Margaret stepped forward and set her own folder beside mine on the table. "Mr. Gaines," she said, addressing Ryan, "my name is Margaret Owens. I'm Walter's attorney. I have some documents here I'd like you to look at. All of you." The yard was so quiet I could hear the Traeger cooling down on the patio, the small metallic ticking of something that has been running hot for a long time and is finally being allowed to rest. Margaret stepped back 1 pace and gave the table to me. That was how she did it, not with words, not with a gesture, just that single step backward that said clearly and completely, "This part belongs to him." 16 years of working with Margaret Owens had taught me that she understood the difference between the law doing its job and a person doing theirs, and that sometimes the most important thing an attorney can do is get out of the way. I picked up the warranty deed. It was a single page, printed on the heavier stock that official documents use, with the Greene County Recorder's stamp in the lower left corner, and the notary seal beside it, and the filing date in the upper right. January 14th, 2022. The morning I had sat across from a title agent and watched the number $600,000 move from my account to a seller's, and received in exchange a piece of paper that said in the unambiguous language of property law that what had been theirs was now mine. I held it up so that the string lights caught it. Not for drama, because I wanted every person in that yard to be able to see it without straining. "I'm going to read one line from this document," I said, "and I want everyone here to listen carefully because this line is the reason we are all standing in this yard tonight." Ryan's jaw was working. He had both hands flat on the table, now leaning forward, and the vein at his temple was visible from 6 feet away. Brianna had moved to stand beside him, not out of solidarity, I thought, but out of the instinct of two people who have been operating as a unit and do not know yet how to stop. I found the grantee line. I had read it so many times in the past 3 days that I could have said it without looking, but I looked because some things deserved to be read from the page. "Walter James Gaines," I said. "Single owner, no encumbrances, no co-signers, no conditions." The yard received that sentence the way a room receives the answer to a question everyone has been afraid to ask out loud, with a silence that was not empty, but full of the specific weight of something that cannot be taken back once it has been said. Ryan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I set the deed back on the table and picked up the certified bank statement from First National, the one Donna Reeves had printed and stamped 14 months of transaction history in black and white, and I laid it open beside the deed so that both were visible at the same time. "This house was purchased on January 14th, 2022, I said. $600,000. Cash. From an account in my name that I had been adding to for 38 years. I kept my voice at the same level I always kept it when I was explaining something on a job site, clear, unhurried, leaving no room for misunderstanding without ever raising it. Not borrowed, not gifted, earned by me alone." One of Ryan's friends, a man in a quarter-zip pullover, who had refilled his beer twice in the past hour, set his bottle down on the table with a sound that was careful and deliberate. The sound of a man deciding he needs both hands free. "Ryan," I said, "you have been living in my house for 9 months. Your wife has been living in my house. Her mother was living in my house." I paused, not for effect, to make sure I was saying it correctly. "You were guests. That was the arrangement. I stated it clearly the night you arrived and you agreed to it." Ryan found his voice. It came out cracked at the edges the way voices do when the thing holding them together has given way. "Dad, you don't understand what we've been dealing with." "I understand exactly what you've been dealing with," I said, "and I understand exactly what you've been doing about it." I picked up the next document, Margaret's copy of the Ohio Revised Code citations she had typed on firm letterhead, clean and formal. "Your attorney will explain the specific statutes if you need them explained. But I want you to hear from me first, in plain language, what the papers say." Margaret opened her folder. She did not read from it yet. She laid it open on the table beside mine and let the presence of it do its work, that particular authority of a document folder opened by an attorney in a professional blazer, in a setting where no one expected one, which communicates without requiring a single word that the situation has moved into a register that cannot be walked back. Brianna's voice came across the table, sharp and sudden, the management finally stripped away. "You can't just—" she started. "The property," Margaret said quietly and completely, "is titled solely to Walter James Gaines. It has been since the date of purchase. No action taken by any occupant of this property, whether financial, legal, or administrative, has altered or can alter that title without the recorded consent of the owner. She said it at the same careful pace she used for everything, and every word landed with the specific weight of a sentence that has been constructed by someone who knows exactly what each one means. That includes the power of attorney document presented to Mr. Gaines in July, which was not properly executed under Ohio law and carries no legal force. The quarter-zip friend picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He did it quietly. He did not announce that he was leaving. He simply reached for his jacket with the careful, deliberate movement of a man who has decided that the ground he is standing on is not ground he chose to be on, and that the most decent thing available to him is to leave without requiring anyone to ask him to. Two of the women at the far end of the table followed, then the couple near the gate. One by one, with the quiet, sidelong efficiency of people who understand that what is happening is private in a way that their presence has made public, Ryan's guests began to collect their things and move toward the gate. Ryan watched them go. I watched Ryan watch them go, watched the audience he had assembled for his toast, for his, "We found it, and we're just getting started," quietly demove itself from the production he had been running in my house for 9 months. His face went through several things in the space of 30 seconds. I recognized all of them. I had worn most of them myself at one point or another over the course of a life, though never in a backyard, never in front of neighbors, and never because I had done what he had done. The last guest paused at the gate, a woman I did not know in a yellow jacket, who looked back at the table and then at me with an expression I could not fully name, but that contained somewhere in it something like recognition. Then she went through the gate, and the latch clicked shut, and the yard contained only the people it needed to contain. I looked at my son across the table. "Now," I said, "let's talk about the rest of it." Margaret opened her folder the way she opened everything, without ceremony, without announcement, with the simple efficiency of a person for whom the work itself is the statement. She took out a document and set it on the table beside the warranty deed, and she did this 7 times, each page placed deliberately beside the last, until the craft paper runner held 2 rows of evidence the way a jury table holds exhibits ordered, numbered, impossible to dismiss. "Mr. Gaines," she said, addressing Ryan, and she used his surname the way attorneys use surnames when they want to establish that the conversation has moved into a register where first names no longer apply. "I'm going to walk you through what we have. I'd ask you to let me finish before you respond." Ryan had not sat back down. He was standing at his side of the table, with both hands on the edge, leaning forward slightly, the posture of a man who has not yet decided whether to stay or leave and is keeping his options open with his body. Brianna stood beside him, arms crossed, now her wine glass set down somewhere and forgotten. Frank was at the side fence, still and quiet, which was the most useful thing he could have been. Tyler was on the back porch steps. I had not asked him to go inside. I had not told him to stay. He had positioned himself there sometime after the guests left, cross-legged on the top step, with his arms around his knees, watching. 8 years old is old enough to understand that something important is happening, without being old enough to understand what it means, and I decided that what he was old enough for was to see it done right. Margaret picked up the first exhibit. "February through October of this year," she said. 9 withdrawals from an ATM on Feedwire Road. $900 each. Total $8,100. She said it in front of Ryan. "The account is in Walter's name. Walter did not make these withdrawals. The transaction pattern, same location, same amount, first week of each month, is consistent with someone who had memorized the PIN and the account number and was using them on a regular schedule." She paused. "Mr. Gaines, do you have an explanation for these transactions?" Ryan's jaw tightened. That was we talked about expenses. Dad agreed. Walter has a different recollection, Margaret said without heat, without acceleration. And the bank has flagged these transactions as unauthorized based on Walter's formal complaint filed Thursday at First National. She picked up the second document. Moving on, the credit cards. Margaret laid out the fraud reports from Donna Reeves, 2 accounts opened online in Walter's name using his social security number, his date of birth, his mother's maiden name. Combined balance at time of discovery, $18,400. Charges at retailers, restaurants, and online platforms that Walter had never visited or used. Brianna uncrossed her arms. She recrossed them higher, tighter, the physical recalculation of a person whose position has changed under them. Identity theft under 18 U.S. Code, Section 1028. Margaret said, is a federal crime. The penalties include up to 15 years in federal prison per count. 2 counts is 30 years of exposure. She said it the same way she said everything. The lack of dramatic inflection made it more frightening, not less. The credit card issuers have both been notified. The Federal Trade Commission report was filed Thursday evening. Ryan pushed back from the table. He did not go anywhere. He took 2 steps back, ran both hands through his hair, and stood there with his arms locked over his head, in the posture of a môme trying to hold his own skull together. And he made a sound that was not quite a word, something between an exhale and something heavier, that he pulled back at the last second, because there were people watching him, and he had spent his whole life needing people to see him a certain way. You went to the police, he said. His voice had lost its shape. Not yet, I said. That is a decision that has not been made. That is what tonight is for. Margaret continued. The power of attorney. She produced the original document, the one Brianna had slid across the kitchen table in July, and laid it flat. She explained in 2 sentences why it carried no legal force, unsigned by the required witnesses, unnotarized, and additionally invalid, because the principal's signature appeared on the witness line, rather than the principal line, which demonstrated, she said carefully, that the signer had not been given adequate time or information to understand what he was signing. Brianna's chin came up. He signed it himself. Nobody forced. He signed it without his reading glasses, Margaret said. At a kitchen table, after being told it was a health insurance update. A pause. That constitutes fraud by misrepresentation under Ohio Revised Code 2913.02. It carries a felony classification. The Zillow listing. Margaret placed a printed screenshot URL listing price, the Dayton Home Sales 88, contact the $500 deposit scheme on the table, and did not need to say much about it because the document said everything. Deed fraud and listing fraud, she noted, both state and federal exposure. An active investigation had been opened with the Ohio Division of Real Estate when she filed the report on Friday. Ryan sat down, not in his chair. He sat on the edge of the folding table itself, heavily, the way a man sits when his legs have decided they are done carrying the situation. His face had gone the color of old wood left out in the weather gray and slightly diminished, the surface texture changed by exposure to things it had not been built to withstand. And finally, Margaret said. She placed the Golden Pines folder on the table, the cream-colored folder with Ryan's handwriting on the tab. She opened it to the page I had photographed in his desk drawer, the application form with my name and date of birth. The line that said, "Father is exhibiting signs of confusion and difficulty managing daily tasks independently." The deposit confirmation for $3,000 drawn from my checking account without my knowledge or consent. Under Ohio Revised Code 2913.45. Margaret said, financial exploitation of an elderly person constitutes a first-degree misdemeanor at minimum and a fourth-degree felony when the amount exceeds $1,000. The deposit alone exceeds that threshold." She paused. Brianna made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of a person who has been managing variables for 9 months and has just run out of variables to manage. Ryan lifted his head and looked at me across the table. Not with anger. Anger had left his face somewhere around the Zillow exhibit. What was there now was something rawer and more honest, the face of a man who has run out of performance and is standing in what remains. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. "I lost everything. The business, the house, everything I built. And He stopped. Started again. "I needed it not to be gone. I needed something to still be mine." The yard was quiet enough that I could hear Tyler breathing on the porch steps behind me. I looked at my son for a long time. 35 years of a face I had watched change from infant to boy to man, and now this, a man sitting on the edge of a folding table in a backyard he did not own, having finally said the true thing. "I know," I said, and I meant it. I understood the arithmetic of losing everything. I had done my own version of it when Carol died, and I knew what it felt like to reach for something solid when the ground was gone. "But Ryan," I kept my voice level, "you reached for something that wasn't yours to take, and you took it from me." The patio light came on automatically as the last of the October daylight left the sky, and in its flat, practical glow, my son put his face in his hands. Margaret picked up the final page, the one with the 2 options printed in the clean, unambiguous font of a document that has been written to be understood. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "here is what happens next." Margaret's final page had 2 columns. She turned it so Ryan and Brianna could read it from across the table, and she gave them a moment before she spoke, not courtesy, but the understanding that people need to see a thing with their own eyes before they can hear it with their ears. "You have 2 options," she said. "Option A, you vacate this property voluntarily by 9 o'clock tonight. You sign the repayment agreement $250 a month against the documented total of $29,500 until the balance is cleared. Walter will not pursue criminal charges at this time, though he reserves the right to do so if the repayment terms are violated." She paused. "Option B, we contact the Beaver Creek Police Department tonight. Walter files formal criminal complaints with the Greene County Prosecutor's Office Monday morning. The civil suit follows, and the eviction proceeds through the courts, which in Ohio, given documented elder financial abuse, moves on an expedited timeline." Ryan looked up. "You can't evict us in one night. That's not how it works." It was a fair question. In Ohio standard eviction, what the law calls a forcible entry and detainer action, requires written notice, a court filing a hearing and a judgment. Under normal circumstances, the process takes 30 days minimum. These were not normal circumstances. Under Ohio Revised Code 5321.11, Margaret said, when an occupant has committed documented financial crimes against the property owner, the owner may petition for immediate termination of occupancy on grounds of material breach. Given the documented evidence of elder financial abuse, identity theft, and deed fraud, all of which occurred on this property, a judge would grant that petition. She looked at Ryan steadily. "We have already prepared the filing. If you choose option B, it goes to the courthouse Monday morning. You would be required to vacate under court order within 72 hours with a sheriff's deputy present." She let that sit for 3 seconds. "Option A gets you out of here tonight, with your dignity and without a criminal record. I would encourage you to consider it carefully." Brianna moved first. She did not say anything to Ryan, did not look at me, did not acknowledge Margaret. She turned and walked into the house, and the sound that followed, drawers opening, closet doors, the rapid percussion of someone packing with efficiency rather than care, told me she had already made her decision and was implementing it. Ryan stayed at the table. He sat with the page in front of him, and his hands flat on either side of it, doing the arithmetic that I had done 9 months ago in that motel room off I-675. The calculation of a man trying to identify what is left that can still be saved. His jaw worked. His eyes were red at the rims, the way they had been the night he showed up at my door in the February rain, which felt like a different lifetime, and was in most of the ways that mattered exactly that. The business was everything I had, he said, still looking at the page. When it went under, I didn't know how to be anything else. Brianna had a plan. She said it would just be temporary, just until I got back on my feet, just until... He stopped. The sentence had no clean ending, and he knew it. I kept telling myself you'd be okay, that you had the house, that you weren't losing anything. I was losing everything, I said. Just more slowly than you did. He looked at me then. Not the Ryan who had pointed tongs at my face. Not the Ryan who had described my relocation to Stroop Road as a practical matter. Something underneath both of those, the boy who had sat on the tailgate of Hap's truck on job sites at 12, asking questions about wood grain and load-bearing walls. The boy who had cried at Carol's funeral without trying to hide it. I did not say any of that. Some things belong to the father, not the story. Sign the agreement, Ryan, I said, and then go. He picked up Margaret's pen, a simple ballpoint $2, and held it above the signature line the way a man holds a tool he knows how to use but is reluctant to apply. Then he signed his name in the careful, slightly oversized cursive his third-grade teacher, Mrs. Calloway, had drilled into him, and I knew every loop of it because I had watched it form over 35 years. He set the pen down and walked into the house without looking at anyone. Tyler came down from the porch steps. He crossed the yard in his sneakers, stepping around the folding chairs, and came straight to me the way he always did when something was happening that he needed an anchor for. I crouched down, my knees protesting, 60 years of weight settling into them, and he walked into my arms and held on with the grip of a child who has been frightened for a long time and is finally somewhere he can let it show. Frank had moved to the far side of the yard, giving us the corner. The kind of thing Frank did without being asked. "Grandpa Walt," Tyler said into my shoulder, his voice muffled and unsteady. "Yeah, buddy." "Are we going to be okay?" I pulled back enough to look at him. The tight around the eyes expression of a child trying to be braver than he is. Carol's directness in the set of his chin. A streak of barbecue sauce on his left cheek that made him look suddenly completely undeniably 8 years old. "You are going to be absolutely fine," I said. "I promise you that." I held his face in both hands the way I held pieces of work I was proud of, carefully, with full attention. "This door is always open for you. Whatever happens between the grown-ups, this door is always open." He nodded. He believed me. That belief landed in my chest and stayed there. At 8:47, Ryan carried the last box through the side gate without speaking. Then Brianna rolling suitcase, the posture of a woman who has decided that departure was her own idea. She passed me without eye contact. There was nothing left that needed saying, and we both knew it. The gate closed. The yard went quiet in the way a space goes quiet when the wrong kind of noise has finally left it, not empty, but cleared, like a workbench after a long job, surface clean, waiting for whatever comes next. Margaret gathered her documents, clicked her folder shut, and looked at me. "Walter," she said, "go get some rest." I looked at the string lights, the cold Traeger, the bare patch along the back fence where Carol's tomato cages had stood. Then I looked at Frank, already stacking chairs with the efficiency of a man who knows the best way to close out an evening is to be useful. "In a minute," I said. I walked to the back fence and stood in front of the bare earth. Dark soil turned over, waiting. Not ruined, just ready. I had 3 packets of zinnia seeds in the laundry room, the same variety Carol had ordered the winter before her diagnosis, from a catalog she had dog-eared in 3 places. I had bought them in September at the hardware store on Wilmington Pike. The same day I bought the dryer sheets, I kept the leather satchel behind. I had been waiting for the right time to plant them. Frank helped me fold the table. We did it without talking, each taking an end, collapsing the legs, carrying it to the garage. He stacked the chairs. I coiled the string lights. At the gate, he put his hand on my shoulder. "You doing all right, Walt?" "Getting there," I said. He nodded once, the nod that meant Tuesday morning coffee was still on, and then he was gone. I heard his truck idle at the curb and pull away, and I stood alone in the backyard for a moment, listening to October settle around me. The house was different at 9 o'clock than it had been at any point in the previous 9 months. Not empty. Returned. Like a joint that has been under the wrong load and is finally at last bearing only what it was built to bear. I walked upstairs. The master bedroom door was open. I had not been inside this room in 7 months. I went to the closet and found the cardboard box on the back shelf, Carol's things in handwriting that was not mine. I lifted it down and opened it on the bed. Her photograph was on top. Our 25th anniversary. The restaurant on 5th Street where the bread was always warm. And she had laughed so hard she covered her face with the napkin, her head tilted back, her silver-streaked hair catching the candlelight. I carried it to the nail above the dresser and hung it there. She looked right in that light. She always had. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her for a long time. "I kept it, Carol," I said. "The steadiest structures are not the ones that feel nothing. They are the ones that feel everything and hold anyway." I reached over and turned off the lamp. In the dark in my room, in my house, I closed my eyes. The house held. If this story taught me anything, it's that patience without documentation is just suffering. I waited too long, smiled too much, and said too little. Don't make my mistake. The moment something feels wrong in your own home, write it down. Date it. Keep the receipts. Because kindness without boundaries doesn't protect the people you love. It just makes you easier to take advantage of. I believe God puts certain moments in front of us, not as punishments, but as corrections. That Saturday night was mine. This is what I've come to understand about family justice. It doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a leather satchel on a craft paper table in a backyard that was always yours. These revenge stories family members never want told are the ones worth telling. Because somewhere out there, another parent is sleeping next to a washing machine in their own house. If this reached you, share it. They need to hear it more than I needed to say it. If stories about family justice and standing up for what's right speak to you, subscribe to this channel and drop a comment below. Your words mean more than you know. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and awareness. If that's not for you, no hard feelings, choose what serves you best.